last month I've been experimenting with a new spotlight. It's from our friends at SIRUI. And the cool thing about this spotlight is that it's a zoom spotlight. So unlike most other conventional spotlights where they have interchangeable lenses and you've got to fork out for two different lenses, this has a zoom built into it, just like a stills lens. So you will have a wider beam and a tighter beam, smaller beam. The magic trick of this is that it's all contained within one unit. You just twist the front barrel like this to adjust the size of your spot, which is fantastic. I've been experimenting with this. I thought it'd be a good excuse to run through a few setups. Although this is a pre-production unit, the lens and internals are not going to change. So everything that you see and the quality of the images will be relevant to, the production unit that you might buy. This first setup is inspired by the X-Files. This is a show I've been obsessed with since I was about 11 years old. Probably far too young to be watching it, but anyway. If you've never seen it, what are you doing with your life? Go and watch it now. It's a masterclass in lighting, has some stunning cinematography, all shot on film. I think it's currently on Disney+. They have some really gorgeous lighting setups across the series. They play a lot with contrast in their scenes. And one technique they use is using hard backlighting whenever they're introducing aliens or, people are getting abducted, which happens a lot. So lots of silhouetting with haze and light streaks and stuff like that. And that's essentially what we're playing around with here. No one's getting abducted, but we're in the living room. We're using the spotlight on a little, I think it's a Xeon G200. So we're shooting on the Komodo on a Sigma 24-70. We're shooting in RAW, so it's really easy to change the color of this scene in post, which is really fun. I think originally we had the light set to 2700. Here we're experimenting with defocusing our camera lens and to get these really nice abstract and ethereal shapes and movements. It's a really nice simple effect, all working with the interaction with haze, light, and the subject. We set the spotlight to a slightly larger beam and made sure it's in sharp focus. That just really helps get those crisp light rays when we stand in front of it. Here we just have Steph running through some yoga moves, and I'm really surprised at how nice this looks and how simple it is. We've got a subject in focus and they're moving around, and we just get this awesome backlight and bloom effect with the haze and some beautiful light beams and streaks coming through as her body cuts the light. It's a nice example of combining hard backlighting and edge lighting and creating, a very striking scene based on a very simple silhouette. Great for music videos or creative studio work. Doesn't need a key, it's just one light and a spotlight. The haze obviously just helps bloom the light a bit, and it fills in some of the shadow on the shadow side of the face. And obviously in post, you can play around with the grade to adjust the level of contrast that is appropriate. What was really useful here with a zoom spotlight is that we have very limited space to work with. And if you're working with a fixed lens spotlight like the Amaran SE, one of the things that you will probably push up against quite a lot is that the only way to change the size of that spotlight is just by physically moving the spotlight around. So for this kind of work, having that extra flexibility is just super useful. One of the things I've not really tried before is this top-down spot setup where you fire the spotlight down onto a table or something on a table, and then you bounce that light back off onto your subject. So I had to cycle through a few iterations before I finished on a result that I was happy with. I started off in my living room on the first day, just me filming myself on the Komodo, firing the spot overhead, boomed in on a C-stand and firing it down below. This is a really great technique if you're tight for space or you don't have room for big softboxes. So we've got a dark blue table. You can see here it's not really giving much bounce on my face. So I had a light coloured sort of cream tan record cover nearby, so I put that in place of the spot, and that obviously gave me a lot more bounce, a lot more level coming back on my face. Obviously when you bounce light, you're getting a nice soft source on your subject. The only problem with this technique is that you can't really use haze, or in my case, if you have a dusty flat, that beam of light is going to show up and illuminate a lot of the dust and kind of give the game away. I'm using the Aputure 300D Mark II on this. I'm basically using the spot on its tightest setting, so the 18 degree, to concentrate as much light in as small area as possible. You are lighting your subject from below, and that style of lighting isn't the most flattering for a subject. I switched it up a little bit and I got Steph to read a book, and I just blasted this book with the spotlight. And I was actually really pleased with the way that this looks. Let me know what you think of this in the comments down below. I quite like it. I think you can get away with the book looking quite hot and overblown. Like, I don't think it's a huge issue. I think the skill here is limiting the spill of that spot. So again, using it on the tightest angle, the 18 degree, and maybe cutting it a little bit with the shutters. And just making sure that the spotlight doesn't spill over onto her body or too much onto her hands, and angling the book slightly towards her face to sort of bounce and position the light more effectively on her face. And I think this works quite well. I think what worried me about this setup is that the level on the book would be too distracting and sort of give it away, but in a sense, it doesn't really bother me. Quite interesting, it's a quite unusual lighting technique. If there were no other way of lighting Steph, I think it would look pretty cool. Next, I wondered what it would look like if I just bounced the light off the wall opposite me. So I rotated the spot round and just beamed it straight into the white wall that was facing me. Here, I think I actually prefer the quality of the light in this case. It's a lot less hard, it's a lot less harsh, it's a lot softer, and there's more of a sort of wrap around the face. It doesn't look as lit or saucy. But the problem is that the output on the light and the bounce and the walls are, probably about a meter and a half away from me. It is a small space, but it's still not providing enough level to light me relative to the room around me. So taking this one step further, roped Steph in to help me. So I'm using a 5-in-1 reflector, I'm using the white reflective side of that, and I've just brought that as close as possible to Steph, bounced it on the table, so we're not losing as much output with reduced distance on the bounce with Steph. And as you can see now, we're getting a lot more level on the face. The 5-in-1 reflector is also much more reflective than our dusty white wall, so we're getting much more level on her. And I think it's also just really impressive how simple this setup is. It's just one light, the spotlight, and then just chucking a 5-in-1 reflector, and you've sort of got a softbox setup, which takes a lot less time to set up and a lot less fiddling around with a giant softbox, taking up lots of room. And if I wanted to put a softbox in that position, I'm not sure it would quite fit, and I wouldn't be able to go as wide in my lens, and we've got quite low ceilings as well. It's kind of cool that you can get this really simple setup using these really simple tools. If you want to go for a sort of a less lit or artificial looking scene, you can just bring the level back by varying the output of the light or move the reflector back. Obviously, we were using a daylight balance light, the 300D Mark II, using the white reflective side of the 5-in-1 reflector, and the practical lights in the room are all warm, so it felt like this scene would look more believable or more motivated if the light hitting Steph's face was a little bit warmer. Chucked in some unbleached muslin cloth. This is a bit warmer, so shone the spotlight into that, and that really did the trick. Because we are, again, bouncing the light, we get this nice subtle wrap around her face. We get some nice fall off into shadow on the camera side of the face, and it just ties together with the scene and looks much more motivated by the practicals in the scene than a daylight colored light. And just before I finished, I also just had a go of, instead of bouncing the light, of just blasting the light through the cloth onto Steph, and that was okay. It was a little bit harsh. The cloth is quite thin, and so you do get some of the harshness of that light on Steph's face. I much prefer bouncing it than shining it through. In this setup, we're going to look at using the spotlight as a hard light source. And I feel especially that I often get too hung up about using soft lighting in my work and often avoid hard light as much as possible. I feel like we do often become obsessed in the pursuit of soft light that we do overlook using hard light, maybe because it's just a bit harder to work with and use. But in this scene, I'm using our living room windows as our motivation for the scene. And I'm just experimenting with blasting our faces with light. Yes, the lighting is quite harsh on the faces, so it definitely creates an edgier vibe, a bit more stark. But I think with the context of the windows, and we can see that, it's bright and sunny, it feels believable and consistent with what we're seeing. And it's basically just a game of balancing the intensity of that spot with the exposure of the camera and the intensity of light outside, and just deciding how that all sits in balance together. Even though the spotlight is a hard light source, it's pretty easy to modify the quality of the light and soften it up a little bit. You can basically just do this by defocusing it or zooming towards the 36 degrees on a lens and then also defocusing it, and that will reduce the intensity of the output. Finally, I just wanted to test out the gobo effects. These are pretty standard, similar to any other spotlight you might get. Basically just little inserts which have textures and patterns which you can project using the spotlight. But I first created this weird flashing sci-fi horror scene with Steph. I don't really know what's going on, but we've got the Amaran F22C flashing red light. We've got the little Zhiyun light acting as a warm backlight, edge light. And then we're just using the spotlight on the Colbor CL220 to overlay a flashing pattern of lines. Again, just like a quick experiment. But what I really liked is when we had Steph shaking her head and hair like this, the way that the flashing lights interacted with this rapid head movement. Like most budget spotlights, there is some chromatic aberration with this unit. This shows up as blue or magenta fringing and is mostly present when the spot is strongly focused. Generally, you're probably not going to notice it unless you're really focusing in on the spotlight patterns. But it is something to be aware of. It's a similar story in the Amaran Spotlight SE. Generally, as you can see here, it's not a huge issue. In this portrait of me, we're using a sort of leafy texture that's slightly defocused to create a kind of dappled sunlight effect. It's very, very subtle. And it took a little bit of playing around with, but it does just break up the light a little bit more than just having a hard spot on me. It creates a little bit more realism, it adds a bit of texture to the scene, and hopefully just hides the fact that we're using artificial light to light me. Finally, in this portrait here, I'm using that same gobo texture, that same pattern, just to fill in that white wall in the background. And we're just using the plant on the right, on camera right, to motivate and sell that pattern as if the light's coming through the window and casting a shadow on the wall. Again, it's very subtle, but you can definitely see that it adds more interest and depth to the scene and breaks up that blank white wall behind me. You can see me sort of fiddling around with the levels, and I think selling this as believable is definitely all going to be in matching the color temperature to the ambient light, matching the intensity of the spot so that it sort of blends in with the environment, and then also the focus of those gobo textures, getting that just about right so it looks believable. The edge light on my face is all coming from natural light from the window. That's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed some of these setups. There'll be a link to buy this in the description down below. If you enjoyed this video, obviously just give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't. I'm Ed Prosser. Thanks for watching, and until next time, see you later.